Hi, I'm Susan King. I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at UNC Chapel Hill, and I have with us, I'll just do the headline, the Daily Tar Heel editor of the past, Thanassis Cambanis. Welcome.
Great to be with you.
And you're here for a number of reasons. I'll give the big celebratory. You are the Young Alumni of the Year.
Distinguished Young Alumni.
How's that feel to be picked that?
Well, it's surprising because I haven't felt young in years, but it's a great honor to connect what I've done in the last 20 years, which has mostly been in the Middle East, or briefly in the American Northeast, to my roots here in Chapel Hill, which is where I learned how to be a journalist.
Oh, that's nice to hear, but I wish I could claim you as one of our alums, but you didn't study here. So did you learn everything at the Daily Tar Heel when you were the editor?
I learned some really important things in the history department and in the creative writing department as well. Okay. Critical thinking, good writing. And I learned one useful thing from the J School. I took a course in media law, which actually helped me prosecute an open meetings case against the university, which we sort of won for a while.
Well, I will tell the professors of media law that was one of the most useful courses that you took, because that is still a core course here.
Great.
Yeah. Foreign policy, though, was your love, right?
Yeah. When I was an undergrad at UNC, the war in Bosnia was going on, and I really felt like it was an injustice that I wasn't free to go and be a freelance war correspondent in Yugoslavia as it was falling apart, and instead I was covering Chancellor Paul Harden and the town gown dust-ups here in Chapel Hill, but the sort of dissolution of the Cold War world order and the its eventual replacement with the sort of American-led war on terror global order was the thing that really fascinated me from the beginning of my adult life. And I mean, the genocide in Rwanda being a really seminal event in our interventions, and then eventually 9/11 and the wars that followed, which I think did a lot to shape our world and certainly shaped my focus in my life since.
Well, let's start with a few of those things, because people may not know. Your foreign correspondent is the real thing. You don't have your trench coat on, but you've got a nice looking suit and you're a foreign correspondent.
Well, is there really such a thing anymore as a foreign correspondent?
Because is there something foreign?
Because there's a job that pays you to be a foreign correspondent.
Well, that is a question, but it seems to me you worked at the Boston Globe as an international correspondent, and they, of course, did close all that down. But my sense is now you are still covering the Middle East, but you're doing it more in-depth and perhaps longer kind of form than just daily newspapering. But you're still somebody who is interpreting the world for an important public.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. When I started growing up, if one can say I grew up, my goal was always to be this sort of ideal we have or had of a foreign correspondent, which is someone who is from here and interprets there back to here. And that really requires being able to have a foot in each place, being able to really know enough to understand and relate to the place you're covering, but not to be fully integrated and captured by it to the extent that you can't relate back to your original audience back home. And that, I mean, it's a sort of intermediary state that's really well suited for people who never feel like they fully belong anywhere, people who are bicultural or people who are just, otherwise always, a little bit weird, a little bit outliers. And that's what I always wanted to be. And I feel like I managed pretty quickly to reach that job. And it's just been a question since then of figuring out who will sign the paychecks for it. And that is, that's not an interesting story about the world. That's an interesting story about the media world, because I'm testament to the fact that you can still do this, but I've gone from doing it for the Associated Press, which was a wire service, to doing it for a Metro Daily, the Boston Globe. I've done it for the New York Times, and now I do it under the aegis of a nonprofit policy foundation, the Century Foundation, which supports me as I write books and articles on the same things that I've been writing about for 15 years.
So do you feel it's a sad commentary about how, as we become more global, as as a country, et cetera, that there are fewer people actually telling us about the world and giving it to us in daily sort of snippets?
It's a crisis. I mean, we need we need a lot of people competitively trying to tell these stories. I mean, I'm focused on the Arab uprisings, which are seminal for the Arab world. They're also a major matter of concern for the United States. We have maybe 1/10 as many journalists of all levels and media types covering the story as we did at the height of say the war on terror or the U.S. interventions that followed 9/11. When I was in Iraq in 2003, there was a community of hundreds of very experienced and well-resourced people covering the entire region. Now there is a community of dozens, and many of them are inexperienced. Many of them have no resources. They're freelancers who can't afford a taxi ride or a translator, much less the resources to do any kind of serious investigation. That's a problem. I mean, I don't think I need to convince you of something that I think we've all bemoaned for a long time. There's real cost to that, and we know less. We know less, and we're able to make decisions less well.
For me, it's a problem because I do feel we're so much more global, and I want to know. And so there's only a few places I can go to find out. But there's probably a lot of Americans who say, too much coverage over there, or I don't want to know more about those wars or those ethnic things, goodness. But what do you find missing? Do you see policymakers making different decisions because the American public doesn't know? What do you see as the consequences?
Well, I mean, on the policy level, they're huge. I mean, we are trying to figure out what to do about Syria, and we literally don't know who the Syrian opposition is. We don't know. It's dangerous and expensive to get into the rebel side of Syria. People have been kidnapped. People have been killed. So we're not doing it. Now in Iraq, that was the same case, and we still did it. So today we're trying to decide whether to support the opposition, how much, and we literally don't know. Is it 80% Al-Qaeda? Is it 10% Al-Qaeda? Are the people of northern Syria chafing and rejecting the fundamentalist Islamists who are flying the black banner, or are they rallying behind them? Mm-hmm. We don't know, and that has huge consequences. I mean, do we want to support these people to replace Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship, or are they a worse enemy? That's a question that has an answer, and the answer has real consequences to whether we want to send these people missiles and military advisors, or want to stay as far away from them as possible, or even maybe we want to prop up the existing dictatorship in Damascus because it's the lesser of two evils. We don't know. That's one major consequence. The other is in political literacy of the American public, and that's a little more removed. But if you look at the one foreign conflict that people think they understand, which is Israel-Palestine, I would argue most people don't, but there's a fundamental level of literacy there, and Americans who pay attention, and again, more Americans pay attention to that than to most other international stories, they will have some basic idea of who the stakeholders are, what the internal politics on either side are, what the consequences of their positions are, and then they'll argue based on that, and that actually creates a real pressure on policymakers to develop a position that makes sense and to defend it. We don't have that on almost any other foreign policy. Imagine if people thought about foreign trade that way, or thought about the mix of supporting human rights or supporting openness with China, or whether they thought about the trade-offs of a reset with Russia. With that level of literacy, we would have better policy. So there's a real symbiosis between how much people understand and what we do as a nation.
So the question might be that intelligence, or U.S. intelligence, ought to be on the ground, and then a reporter could cover a story that way. Not good enough?
No, and the thing is, there's no substitute in the long term for actually having a presence on the ground in the conflict zones that you cover. If you have been somewhere and you're well sourced up, when you are forced out and can't go back in anymore for a while, you can still you can ride on remote contact. You can Skype people you can vet people you've never met through the networks of actual human beings that you do know. But you can't rely for any depth of time on these sort of unknown and unseen people. You certainly can't rely on intelligence. I mean, first of all, they're only good so far as they go because of their agenda, but usually they don't know anything. I mean, if you interview intelligence sources, they're not going to know this commander or that commander, are going to be able to tell you what happened in the alleged nerve gas attack in Ghouta or in another small village. So in the end, you are, as a reporter, just like a lot of the policymakers, you're stuck Skyping people who are telling you about the nerve gas attack, or who are making outlandish claims to refute it, and you're interviewing people in person who tell you in ways you can't corroborate, yes, I was there and now I fled and here's what I saw. And you do the best you can, like a forensic, forensic human rights examiner or an autopsy crime scene investigator, and it's very unsatisfactory. And having done it both ways, I mean, we were able in Iraq and in Afghanistan to go and try on the ground to be decent journalists and put together something close to a verifiable account. Now we see in Syria how it works when you can't be there, and it's a, I won't say it's a failure, but it's a frustrating exercise with huge gaping holes.
So one of the things that interests me is that various foundations, like the Century Foundation, which you're now a member of, but Council on Foreign Relations and various groups who care about the world, are now in a way becoming sources about information about the world because it's been abdicated by so much of the media. Is there a difference in the culture? Is it satisfying? Can that fill the gap?
It can't fill the gap. I mean, there are a few number of so-called experts who are actually people with first-hand knowledge, who have real meaningful stuff to offer. For example, they travel, I'm going to stick with the Syria example because it seems to really illustrate what we're talking about. They travel into opposition areas, or they travel to government areas. They have contacts, they know things. So when they are talking, they're not just commenting, they're not just opining, they're not just offering analysis. They've spoken to people in the Syrian army, they've spoken to people in the opposition. Those people are they're important as secondary sources, essentially as eyewitnesses. There are not that many of them. Mostly what you have is analysts. And an analyst is, for the most part, no better than a journalist. I mean, they sit there and they read something. Maybe they know Arabic and the journalist doesn't, or maybe they've never been there and the journalist has. But at any rate, they are reading secondhand sources and then giving a third-hand analysis. That's what fills a lot of our air. That's what creates a lot of our copy. And I'd say it's often just barely better than nothing.
Mm. Are you optimistic about this gap getting filled? The policy, foreign issues, wars, terrorism will get covered by journalists once again with some vitality?
I'm very optimistic for the long term, and as the old saw has it, in the long term we might all be dead. I don't know how long the medium term lasts. We've already lost a good 10 years to this marketplace disruption, which has had, as we talked about, real costs. I think we're facing another 10, 20 years at least where we're not going to get as much as we need, where there won't be revenue to support enough good journalism, and we'll have to rely on what bits and pieces manage to survive. Eventually we'll have it because it's something people want and they'll pay for.
And what brings the optimism, though? Just that there will be a market for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing of ineffable value that governments need, people need, citizens want, and eventually they'll find a way to direct their money to it.
And what has drawn you to the Middle East? What makes you, you're a student now of it. Yes, the conflicts have been there, but what has drawn you to it?
I mean, initially, America's involvement in the Middle East was what took me there. And it's trite, but I was really profoundly gripped by the story and by the region and the culture. And as a Greek, I'm part historically of the Ottoman world, and there's a lot of common history there. And it turns out to just be really inescapably fascinating. And the uprisings that began in late 2010 really renewed the depth of my interest in the region, because as a thinker and as a journalist and a chronicler, with so much happening, it's impossible not to be completely drawn in and absorbed by it.
And we could go on for hours, but I'll try to summarize. What do you think of this part of the world right now? Is there sort of an awakening of democracy? I won't even use that word, Arab Spring. Do you feel like something is really transformational at this moment?
Something transformational absolutely happened. I don't use the word awakening either. I don't use the word spring. I talk about the Arab revolts, the Arab uprisings. We can try to figure out as the years go by whether these were revolutions or just uprisings. But what absolutely happened was that after half a century where these regimes really effectively dismantled civil society and wiped out, down to an individual level, people's ability to organize and act and have even the most mild kind of claim of citizenship over their own lives. Millions of people broke through this wall of fear. I mean, this is a cliche, but it has become a cliche, but it's really true, and it was an astounding process to watch. People who had been very effectively made to feel afraid for real reasons decided they no longer cared, and they rose up, and they not only toppled these tyrants, but they have begun to create new kinds of civil society. They've begun to create new sort of indigenous, authentically Arab ideas of citizenship, of dignity, of rights that aren't imitations of Western democracy and rights, and nor are they concepts that sit at all comfortably with the Arab authoritarian states. And this will this will have to be resolved. Now, it's not inevitable that this leads to a great new, transparent, accountable, and just life. I mean, as we see in these states where things have gone backwards, if a regime is willing to kill enough people, if a regime is willing to be violent enough and manages to keep enough of the institutions of state on its side, it can crush a revolt, even a revolt by the majority. So there's no foregone inevitable conclusion that it works out. But a threshold was crossed, a transformation happened, and it means that now, from 3 years ago onward, people's aspiration for rights, transparency, accountability, dignity is part of the political conversation, and it means that the orders that emerge from this tumult and could emerge in another year, could emerge in 20 years or 2 more generations. But whatever emerges is going to have to factor this in, and I'm optimistic will be, in most cases, better than what came before.
I can see your history roots in that. Last question. You live in Beirut. You've got 2 kids. Mm-hmm. You're married.
Yep.
Good place to raise your kids?
Oh, it's a great place to raise kids. I mean, the parks are inferior to New York's parks, which is difficult when the kids are little. But it's a beautiful place. There's so many things to do. Just a few minutes from Beirut, you can take the kids to the marina. You can take them to the beach. You can take them to the hills. You can take them to Roman ruins in 5 minutes. People are incredibly friendly. Kids speak Arabic, French, and English, and it's just beautiful weather all year long. It's hard to beat. It's hard to beat Beirut. It's
nice to have you back in Chapel Hill.
Great.
Congratulations on your Alumni Award, and keep me optimistic about the Middle East and about foreign reporting.
Thanks for having me, and I'll do my best.